So my name is Jessica Lori, and I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University. And the Interfaith Center is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to invite people from diverse secular, spiritual, and religious traditions to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendship. We seek to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So this evening, we're doing another kind of program that's part of our faith sharing series. And tonight we're talking with Livia Kohn, who's talking about Taoism. And Livia is a professor emerita of religion and East Asian studies at Boston University, where she began teaching in 1988 after spending 10 years in Kyoto, Japan. She has written 34 sole-authored books and over 100 articles, translated 5 works from the German, French, Chinese, and Japanese, and edited 11 multi-authored volumes, as well as 14 issues of the Journal of Taoist Studies. After retiring from university teaching in 2006, Livia now serves as the executive editor of Three Pines Press, gives Zoom lectures via Dao Explore, and runs Taoist workshops. For details, you can visit her online at www.threepinespress.com, and that's spelled out THREEPINES press, threepinespress.com. So I am going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Olivia, and thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Jessica, and thank you so much for having me. I hope everybody can hear me just fine and the computer audio works. Our topic today is to look at Taoism in its different forms and what it did historically and what its situation is today. And so we start with Taoism comes in 3 distinct forms: a philosophical, a religious, and a longevity dimension. And the philosophical dimension is also known as the literati trend or strand of Taoism. It is the oldest of the 3, goes back to about 500 BC, and is associated especially with ancient philosophers, such as Lao Tzu, that you may be familiar with. The Daodejing is usually a text that people in the West have heard of or read, and it has been quite inspirational to a lot of thinkers and poets. And there's another thinker who's a little bit more literary in his expression called Zhuangzi. But while this tradition goes back to 500 BC, it has continued to flourish. And we do have philosophical interpretations, commentaries of these texts. And we have also quite a number of other philosophers in the tradition, both ancient and in the Middle Ages and into the modern age. So it's a living tradition, and the way Taoists, it's a more philosophical approach to life, a way of thinking, really. The religious, or also known as organized form of Taoism, goes back to 200 AD. And the earliest school is called the Celestial Masters, and then later schools include School of Highest Clarity and the School of Complete Perfection. And we need to know about this is that they're really like what we understand by organized religion. We have a priesthood, we have ordination, we have sacred scriptures, we have rituals, we have temples, we have monasteries. So everything that you would think of as an organized religion is present in this kind of form of Taoism. And again, it starts around 200 AD, but it has survived to the present day. The Celestial Masters are still around. They're married and householders and have temples and serve the community in different ways, rituals when major life situations, purifications. And the Complete Perfection School, which is dominant in mainland China, is a monastic organization, but they also run temples and resorts and retreat centers. The third type is longevity or health kind of Taoism, and we do have earliest documentations going back to about 200 BC, and it's a form of practice that starts in Chinese medicine. Longevity practices involve different kinds of health techniques, including breathing exercises, physical exercises, like gentle kind of like yoga. Think of yoga in the Taoist context or Chinese context. Also advice on how to live your life, like things like take a walk after your dinner and don't eat too much, and don't mollycoddle yourself by wearing too many warm clothes when it's a little chilly, and so on and so forth. So they're really interested in improving health and improving long life, and the earliest documentation goes back to like 200 BC, and those are manuscripts. But again, you have this very much active over the centuries, and you have today the practice of Tai Chi that I'm sure many of you have familiar with or have at least seen, and the practice of Qigong go back to this kind of dimension of Taoism. It's Taoist because the idea is that you're refining your vital energy and you're developing a spiritual dimension of life through the health practices. So it's not just health, it's health as part of being having a higher level of purity in the universe. So here we have three pictures. On the left, you see a picture of Lao Tzu depicted from like a 13th century woodblock print, who was like a hermit and, hairy and bearded, and who was the philosopher. In the middle, we have the founder of the Celestial Masters, Zhang Daoling, who was he looks up to the Northern Dipper constellation, connecting to the gods and the skies. And then on the right, we have the internal passageway diagram, which shows the human body as a form of landscape. So you have all kinds of sacred elements in your body. So you're transforming your body into a more universal entity, or you're not transforming it, you're recognizing the fact that the body is originally part of a cosmic power and part of a cosmic pattern. Now we do have the attraction is that why are people following these kinds of practices or this form of Taoism? The people who follow Literati Taoism think of it as a particular way of life, a certain attitude towards the world. It's like a balance. It's like the Tao is like a flow. It moves into undulating patterns of yin and yang. It teaches you to relax. It teaches you to be open to different developments. It's like there actually is like a form of Taoist cognitive therapy that uses ancient Taoist sayings and parts of the ancient Daodejing to reorganize people's thinking into a more relaxed way. So people are attracted to this because like, oh my God, my life is so stressful. What can I do to alleviate that, to live a life and be productive and be part of society and all that, but not be stressed out by it. And so the Literati philosophical kind of Taoism helps with that. The organized Taoism gives you, like any kind of Western religious community, why do people in the West, when they move to a new place, they come and join a church? I mean, they could be praying at home. No, they go to the church because there's community, there's an organized pattern of connecting to the divine, there's ritual, you get a sense of being protected by the gods. You have like this divine presence in your life in forms of one or many various deities. There's a central deity in Taoist, an organized Taoism, representative of Tao, but then you also have a lot of what the Catholics would call saints, people who are, responsible for certain aspects, for childbirth or for protecting your house or keeping you free from accidents. So you have this protection of this community of saints, and you have also the community of people. And longevity, obviously, people are attracted. They practice Qigong and Tai Chi because they're healthy, their well-being is improved. And they're also thinking of, as they become healthier, they're also more environmentally conscious, so they're helping the environment. Now, serious Taoists participate in all three of these aspects. So they read the Daodejing and the ancient philosophers, and they accept and work with its particular way of looking at the world. They engage in the rituals, the purifications, they pray to the gods, they meditate, and they also engage in longevity practices and create a bodily awareness of the world. Now, the Daodejing in the West is one of the most, probably the most translated book from a different culture into English. English translations alone are over 200 to the present day. And the text can be read in three different ways. So scholars tend to look at it as a resource to understand how Chinese history and politics, political thinking was at the time. The text was originally written, addressed to a ruler. So the ruler should be more relaxed. The ruler should stay out of his subject's business. The ruler should let people, develop their full potential and not be a tyrant and control everything. The ruler should not engage in war. So things like that. So you learn about what are some of the key issues in ancient Chinese politics and history by looking at this text. But it's also a very philosophical text. So it is some people, it's a second group, they read it as a presentation of universal principles, which means things flow, they come and go, they rise and decline. It's an ongoing flow of things. And if you're pushing too hard, all you get is more resistance. So it's much better to tread softly. And yes, you have your goals, but you are gentle about them. You don't want to make too many words, like a saying that true words are not beautiful and beautiful words are not true comes out of the Daodejing. Or another proverb that you may already have heard is, a 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step. So it's like you take baby steps, you start small and then you keep going. So there's like wisdom, basic principles of life that the text represents. And so people look at it as a philosophical document. And then there are these applied to modern life, people who look at it for the modern relevance. And we do have quite a few translations where the people who are presenting the text really don't know any Chinese, but they read like a whole pile of earlier translations and they find that it speaks to them in a certain way, and then they put their particular understanding into the text. And some of them are very powerful and very inspiring, very poetical, and some of them are really going very far away from the original. So an example for this, a very contemporary, would be Wayne Dyer, who is, of course, very well known for his work on the power of intention. But he ended up spending like a whole year on reading the Daodejing in different translations and meditating on it, and then he created his own version of it. Here's some examples. The 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step, like I already said. You're patient, make small efforts. True words are not beautiful. You're honest, you should be honest and clear. Another saying is 30 spokes make a wheel, but it is the empty center that makes it work. It realized the value of emptiness and openness. Emptiness is a major value. The idea that you need space, the idea that things need to be open to unfold, that you can't overcrowd your life. Knowing when it is enough is an important concept, the idea of sufficiency, which balances the tendency, which of course is very much a modern tendency, but which also seems to have been a tendency in the old days, with people always wanting more and wanting bigger and better and always consuming things. And so it's like, you know what? I don't really need a 10,000 square foot house, maybe 2,000 is enough. I don't really need 4 cars, maybe 1 or 2 is enough. So you can start to think of, where is my sufficiency, where is my comfort level. And so sufficiency is not a number, sufficiency is a level of being aligned in a proper way. It's like, this is my place in the universe, and this is what I need to make it work. Yin and yang alternate, which balances the modern idea that there's always progress. So the idea that, wherever there's a rise, there must be a decline. And so if, the housing market goes up, and then at some point it goes back down. And so this is just the way it is. And you sort of are more at ease with this flow of the world when you accept these kinds of ideas. Do nothing, and there's nothing that is not done. And it's not so much as do nothing, doesn't mean that you're just sitting on your couch and just, watch TV. It really means that you just allow things to happen. Allow things to happen, and things will unfold. It balances the need for constant action and being on the move. And it also is a very political value, in that it is against any form of government interference. And there's the value of naturalness, which balances the interference with nature and emphasizes environment and protection, but also on a very personal level sort of looks at, what are some of the things that come naturally to you? So where do you feel most comfortable? So it's like your own fulfillment on the basis of who you are and what your environment is rather than trying to be something that you're not. So those are the values that we have in the Daodejing. It emphasizes weakness and softness. It says that the strong often do not prevail, and the image of this here is water. Water is very soft and very weak, but it really, if it flows steadily and drips continuously, it has a very strong power. And then non-action, which we just mentioned, doing nothing, is the idea of letting things move at their own speed. The sage is an individual who has good values, who also has a lasting impact on society. And then ideally, and that's a political vision, like utopian kind of small communities where people live very simply. They create harmony in family and society, and they do not overextend themselves, and they sort of are in a close connection to nature. So this idea that you eat food that is in season, and you don't overeat it, and you eat organic and natural, and your clothing is organic and natural, and you only need so much, and that's enough. So it's that sense of being in line with nature, which in any kind of society that is high on luxury and has a high level of alienation, is a value that has a lot of appeal. So that ends our discussion of the philosophy part. Now the religion, there are temples, which are major centers of worship, and they usually have key deities. Lord Lao, who is the deified Laozi, representative of the Tao itself. And then there's a trinity, the 3 pure ones. There's a creator deity. There's a deity who reveals the scriptures, who's like a communication kind of deity. And then a third one who is more practically oriented and who provides specific methods and techniques. And a lot of the health techniques that go into the third part of Taoism are actually, in terms of the organized religion, are revealed or transmitted by holy figures. And then we do have the idea of immortals. Those are people who have practiced various kinds of personal refinement techniques, or ascetics, often retire into the mountains, and then they've created a level of purity in their bodies and in their minds that allows them to be highly spiritual. So again, like a little bit like the saints in the Western tradition. Religion also has sacred scriptures, texts that are to be studied and recited, and some of them are like the gospel, they're like the whole core sacred scriptures. In the Taoist tradition, those are texts that are originally stored in heaven and that have been transmitted by visionary sages. Every so often, every few hundred years, a new batch of texts is being transmitted. But then there's also commentaries to the scriptures, there are precepts, moral rules, there's ritual descriptions, there's health technique descriptions. And so some of these are to be studied and to be learned from and to follow, and others, like the very holy ones, need to be recited. Rituals are ceremonies and services to send petitions to the gods. They involve both thanksgiving and repentance, and also asking for certain blessings. It's very similar to what other people do in other organized religions. You have a divine presence of some form or another that you relate to in this way. And then Taoism as a religion also provides services. So they give you like little talismans or charms to protect your car or protect your house. They have rituals for healing purposes. So people have an ailment and medicine doesn't help, then they can go to a temple and they can have like a purification and exorcism type ritual to get rid of whatever is ailing the person. They help in childbearing and in giving birth. They also celebrate marriage, and they do have rituals for death and the transition into the other world. So here's a picture of a Taoist temple that's in Taiwan. And you can see people having burning incense. So the gods in the Taoist tradition live on incense. They absorb the smoke, and people come and put incense in the burner, and then they step up to the altar that's behind here and they make their petitions. You do have various dragon type of pillars on the right and left. There's all kinds of ornamentations, many lamps, some of which are donated by the faithful. And so you do have, people can hire a priest for a special service, but a lot of times people just come to the temple and make an offering, or get like a little oracle type thing. You do have some temples where you have services, not necessarily on a Sunday morning like in the West, but on certain days. Certain saints have birthdays, and then celebrations are being held. Some are just a day, some are real big festivals for like multiple days. Here's a monastic situation. We have a lady Taoist walking along this corridor. A lot of the monasteries are very beautiful. They're traditionally built. They're sitting in mountains. And they do wear this traditional garb, which is like a dark blue kind of coat, top coat over pants, and they have these wrappings around their lower legs to keep their legs warm. Here's an image of the central deity, Lord Lao. He's often depicted with a beard and with his hair tied up in a top knot. Unlike Buddhists who shave their heads, Taoists cultivate long hair, and they tie it up into this knot on top of their heads, and it becomes like a sort of an antenna to the divine energies that come down from the heavens. And he's holding like a fly whisk in his hand as part of an effort to dispel evil or impure influences. Here's the Trinity I talked about. The central deity is the creator God, known as the heavenly worthy of primordial beginning. And the deity on his right is called the Lord of Tao. So he is the one who would reveal scriptures and who would give instructions, more like community rule type of instructions, general insights. And the deity on the left is the Venerable Lord, who provides more concrete descriptions of techniques. So we do have this trinity known as the three pure ones, and they are essentially present in all Taoist temples today. And they also represent some of the key major schools of the Taoist tradition. This is another figure known as the Yellow Emperor. He's obviously dressed in yellow. He's got this crown on his head, which is like a traditional Confucian type official crown or headdress. And then you will see in front of him, you can see these three line patterns. Those are trigrams or lines that represent yin and yang, and they go back to the I Ching, which is the Book of Changes, a book that was used in the very ancient times for divination purposes, to find out which direction the influences of the universe were going. So it's a way, it's like an oracle book, and it was integrated into Daoism. And the Yellow Emperor is a fairly technical kind of figure. He's responsible for a lot of medical techniques in the health tradition. He's also involved in divination and fortune telling techniques. And so his deity, as a deity, he appears variously, surrounded by all these different dragons and other mythical beasts. Here we have an immortal who's riding on some kind of a lion or tiger, and he has a golden crown, and flowers are offered to him, and his hands are connecting. The one finger pointing upward is connecting to the heavens. And then in the left hand, I think he holds a round globe that sort of connects to earth. Here we have an example of a Taoist scripture. This is the Daodejing, the scripture of preserving life. They're obviously in Chinese characters. They're written from right to left and from top to bottom. So your title would be way on the right, and then your text comes, starts on the top right and goes down in vertical lines. And as you can see, there's no punctuation whatsoever. So traditional Chinese texts, you have to figure out what it means in order to be able to know when your sentence ends. And so people are not, if people do not labor their bodies, then the 100 diseases cannot invade. So those are kind of health-oriented practices that recommend things. Here we have a group of Taoists celebrating a ritual. You have three central officiating priests, with the center person being the number one, and the other two being assistants. And they wear very formal robes that are embroidered and very colorful. And the robes are unique to the individual person. So it's not like in some of the other places where you just walk in and pick a robe and put it on while you're in the ritual and take it off. It's the robes are part of the person's identity, and so his unique status and his unique position is represented by the robes. And they have those headdresses with those little metal type flames that are symbolic of the spirit and the connection to the spirit, to the other world. And then on the right and left, we do have a total of 6 like chorus, choir type people. And you will notice that they're both male and female in this group. And Taoists, unlike many other religions, do not discriminate against women. Women are treated equally in all respects, and they can attain all the higher priestly ranks, and they participate in the rituals. And even the monasteries are not segregated. So you have men and women practicing together, which on occasion leads to, of course, closer connections between the sexist things where people enter the monastery and hang out for a while and then eventually find somebody they really like, and then they leave the monastery and get married. So it does happen, but by and large, they do very well with this non-segregation situation, because the idea is that you're cultivating your internal energy, and at some point genderization and what biological sex you're born with become irrelevant. So you do have musicians here and singers. So they sing, they have the drum, they have a wooden fish, they have gongs, they have cymbals. So there's various kinds of chants. And the chantings on a daily basis, every morning and evening in the monasteries, Taoists chant a set of sacred scriptures. In some places that includes also the Daodejing. Here we have 3 priests worshiping in front of an altar. That's in a temple in Xi'an, and it's part of their afternoon or evening services. Major centers in China, we have temples in the cities, and we have temples on mountains, and we have temples in Western countries. So in the cities, the most important temples are the White Cloud Temple in Beijing and the Black Sheep Temple in Chengdu, which is in Sichuan in the southwest of China. They're big compounds, right smack in the middle of the city. Many monks and nuns live there. They usually also have medical clinics. They have a whole series of worship halls. They're surrounded by a high wall. They close their gates at sundown, and they don't get up until the sun rises. So they sleep a lot more, or they spend a lot more time meditating in quiet in the winter when the days are shorter. Mountains are Mount Hua and Mount Tai. Those are the sacred mountains of the west and of the east. And then in Sichuan, there's Mount Qingcheng, which is where the first celestial master received the revelation from Lord Lao. And then there's Mount Wudang, which is in the south, which is very famous for its Tai Chi Chuan practice. And in the west, we do have a Feng Loi Kok, which is an Taoist organization, and you may have heard of it. They advertise every so often. They do Taoist Tai Chi as a major practice, and people are quite attracted to that. There's a very big center north of Toronto in Canada, and then there's one in Tallahassee in Florida, a smaller one near Clearwater also. And they have other minor, lesser centers, but they're quite widespread. And then we do have quite a few smaller Taoist places in the West, and especially run by Westerners who trained in China with Chinese masters and then started their own little organization. Many of them have, just a small space in the cities, but they're starting to, or have over the last 10 years, especially several of them have started to build, they bought land and they're starting to build big temples and retreat centers. So here's the entrance of the Baiyunguan, the White Cloud Temple in Beijing. You have these round gates, and then there's a series of courtyards. So you always have another hall and another courtyard, another hall and another courtyard. This is what this would look like. You beautifully landscaped and designed gardens, and people walking from one hall to the next. Usually the three pure ones, the Trinity, are further in the back. The holier it gets, the further back you get. And so you do have some divine officials and some immortals and various functional deities, deities that protect health, or deities that, serve childbirth, things first, and then eventually you get to the core deities of the universe. And so it's a series of courtyards, and and gardens. This is Mount Hua, the holy mountain of the West, and it's consists of 5 peaks, and they're very forbidding, really. They're very high. It rises very sharply from the plains, and it's very rocky, obviously, as you can see. And in the old days, it took like 8 hours of walking just to get to the first peak. And nowadays, of course, you have a cable car, which makes it more tourist friendly. But then from there, you really have to climb. And so you have these temples. This is on the north peak of Mount Hua, temples that are really built on the top of these steep cliffs, and monks and nuns live there, not too many of them, and meditate and practice their activities. And there are different cultivation techniques. And they do have very simple diet, obviously, since you have everything has to be carried up there for food. This is Mount Qingcheng in Sichuan. It's a little more gentle, but it's a big range. So it's just the first part of the mountain has a lot of temples, and there's a big statue of Lord Lao on the top of the first range. But then in the back, you have smaller hermitages, and it starts to be more of a wilderness kind of area. This is the first temple you get to if you enter Mount Qingcheng. It's associated with the first celestial master. It's called the Grotto of the first celestial master. And you have a number of all these different Chinese characters are markings, names of deities that are worshipped in those different little niches or cabins or corners of this main sanctuary. Here's a map. So you can see how there's, let's see, there's Nanjing. See, Peking is up at the very top. And there's Hengshan is there, that's the sacred mountain of the north. And then if you look down and to the right in a province called Shandong, there's Taishan, which is the holy mountain of the east. And then if you look further south, there's Songshan, the Shan means mountain. So Mount Song, which is the central mountain in Henan, and next to it is Mount Hua, further west near Xi'an, which is Xian, which used to be the capital until the 13th century or 14th century, when the Mongols established Peking or Beijing as the main capital. And so this is sort of the Chinese heartland in the middle there. And then south of there is Mount Wudang with all the Taiji things. And then if you look further to the left and way over, you see Chengdu and Qingcheng Mountain further in the south and west. And then there's a few others towards the east. So there's Taoist mountains everywhere, in other words. Longevity Taoism is dedicated to personal self-cultivation, and here's a number of the key methods that people use. One of them is feng shui, which means the placement of your house in nature and in among other houses, and the placement of furniture inside your house. You want the vital energy, which is called qi, and that's really all it is about. All this cultivation in longevity Taoism is to enhance and align and harmonize your vital energy. And so your energy in your environment needs to be clear and smooth for your energy in your body to be good. And then they practice healing with the supplementing their diet was herbs and acupuncture. So if you have any ailments, any imbalances in your bodily system, they remedy that. They use, they have dietary practices where they emphasize organic and fresh food, and the monastic practitioners are vegetarians. Taoist, ordinary Taoist lay followers or philosophers are not vegetarian. But the tendency is that you would have either like a Chinese medical physician or a dietary advisor who would help you say, okay, you know, you're a little imbalanced this way, you need more warming foods, or your body's too hot, you need more cooling foods. So that they classify food according to what it does to your body, rather than in terms of carbohydrates and proteins. It's not what they do. They talk about the energetic qualities of food. And so you be very aware of the seasons. So you're balancing, like in the summer, you're drinking, they don't like cold things in general. They think cold things are not good for you, and ice cream is a total no-no in the Chinese system. But so even in the summer when it's warm, you want to drink warm tea, not necessarily hot, but warm, because you don't want to overcool your body, because if you overcool your body, then come winter when it's cold, you don't have the resistance to the cold and you'll get sick. So they're very aware of their own personal situation and also the seasonal situation in terms of food. They do breathing exercises. There are various kinds of deep breathing, conscious breathing. One set of breathing exercises that's quite popular also in the West is the 6 healing sounds. It's a way of exhaling in a certain way. So you're exhaling like with your mouth wide open, go, or you're exhaling with your mouth sort of, so different kinds of noises that you make as you're exhaling, putting your mouth in a different position, balances your energy in certain ways. Then they have physical exercises, which I call healing exercises, such as Daoism, which literally means guiding the qi and stretching the body, and Qigong, which is energy work, and also Tai Chi goes into this category. And they have meditation exercises where they do concentration. They become aware also of the energies in the body, and they feel, allow the energy to flow in certain ways in the body and calm themselves down. So here we do have a bright, powerful garden that has the feng shui powers, where the energy is flowing, the water flows from the side, it springs up, it forms a pool, and it is very I think this is okay. So this is an example of a good feng shui situation, and so gardens and greenery are very important. Another part of feng shui is something a system known as the 8 corner system. So the way this works is like, as you enter your house, and it's the entrance, not the door you actually go into. A lot of people go in through their garage, or they come in the back door or side door. It's the actual designed front door of your house. And that's when you come in. And you go straight ahead. It's like the corner that signals fame. And then on the far left of the house, as you come in, is the wealth, or what we call it, the money corner. And then to the far right of the house is your marriage or relationship corner. And then there's your elders, your family, sort of what you inherit, is to the far left. Your children, which also includes projects. It's not just physical children of the next generation, although that's obviously included, but it also means children in the sense of something that you're contributing to the world. And then you have the knowledge or meditation or philosophy corner on the left, right left of the entrance, and the helpful people corner, like your community corner, to the right from the entrance, and you're entering into your career corner. And the way this works, it works for the house as a whole, and it works for each individual room and each individual story. So if you have a multi-story house, then you walk up the second floor, and then as you're coming up, that's your entrance, where you're entering the second floor. And then it doesn't matter what the direction is. So the north and east don't come into it. So you overlay this pattern. And you want a house that has all the corners. So it should be square or octagonal or round or even rectangular, but you don't want to miss any corners. And then you do want certain things, things that nurture that particular energy in the corner. So you don't want your toilet in your money corner. because it flushes down the wells. So bathrooms in the money corner are to be avoided if possible. But then they have remedies for this. This moves on to acupuncture. So they have remedies where they use mirrors, they use certain plants, like you can put greenery, you can have little aquariums with water, like we had in this slide. And if you want to be aware of this, next time you go to a Chinese restaurant, you will notice that you will never go in a Chinese restaurant and be immediately in a big open space. You usually have a little vestibule or a little entranceway, and then you have to go to your right or left. And that's important because it keeps the qi, the energy, from flowing too fast. And fast flowing qi will take away the profits. And then a lot of the restaurants, they will have pictures of waterfalls, they will have aquariums, they will have some kind of water thing in there, because water is the fluid, is the positive energy of the universe that translates into profitability and prosperity. And then a lot of them have like red and yellow signs or little placemats, and red and yellow are the colors of prosperity again, and they're producing each other. Red produces yellow in the energy system of the Chinese. So it's very present. This is something that goes way back, but it's very concrete. These are some pictures of acupuncture needles. I'm sure you wouldn't want to be poked by most of these. The one in the middle is very small. And they're originally understood as like lancets that are poking into the body to get rid of noxious influences and potential demonic patterns. So acupuncture works with the understanding that there's energy lines through the body that connect the internal organs in the torso to the extremities, and they go either to the hands or the feet, running along the inside or the outside of the arms and legs. So you have each organ has, they call them meridians or energy line or vessels, energy channels, has these meridians on both sides of the body. So there's pairs of them, they're called paired meridians. And an acupuncture point is a point where that energy line comes to the surface so that you can activate it. And you can activate it with massage. You can activate it by putting like heat on it, warming the area, or you can activate it with a needle. And the needles they both release, like if there's too much, the flow of energy is too intense, then the needle will release it, or the needle will steer it in a certain direction. Diet is they're very conscientious about diet. So, and they like to think of different flavors and also different colors of food that should be present. So we have a red, a green, a white, and a dark presented here. So that's carrots and peppers and mushrooms and bean sprouts in all vegetarian. That was from a Taoist restaurant in Beijing, picture we took some years ago. So again, like I said earlier, diet is you're conscious about balancing what your body needs and also what the seasons need. Here are some examples of exercises. There's an exercise chart that was found in a tomb dated to 168 BC, the so-called Daoism 2. And you have different people doing these different kinds of exercises. Many of them are done standing up, but we do have ample literature on this material that also talks about doing them seated or lying down. And so some are very vigorous, 30 times jumping up and down and waving your arms about. Some are more like yoga, where you're having focus on the breathing as you're stretching and much more slowly and more gentle. Some are more meditative. Here's a temple in Hong Kong where people practice these exercises in the morning. They come together and there's a person there who guides them through these kinds of exercises. And then here's a Taiji that's on the outskirts of Xi'an. You see the big city wall to the right. It's in the old moat, which is now a public park. And people practice Taiji, in this case, with swords. So many Chinese in the mornings will go out and do these exercises. And many Taoist temples have their own particular, especially mountains, not the city temples, but the mountains have their own forms of Taiji. The goal of the longevity practices is harmony, health, and success. Harmony in the sense of creating a balance of different aspects of life. So you don't just do one thing. You have your work, family, friends, food, sleep, rest, fun, all these come together and you have like a good harmonious kind of lifestyle. You want to develop a strong, healthy body so you can enjoy your life and live your proper lengths of time. And then this leads to success in that once you're healthy and you have a balanced lifestyle, then you can build good relationships and you can also be very effective in work and in the creation of wealth. So there's nothing wrong with being prosperous. It's just, again, you want to temper it with that sense of sufficiency. And then once you have sufficient, then you can start to give to others. And like, again, many Christian and Western, other religions, other organizations of other religions, Taoist groups are very much involved in charity, and they have schools and kindergartens and even higher education places. They give money to the people who are underprivileged or homeless, and they do a lot of social relevant work on the basis of having developed this own good fortune and health for themselves. So altogether, we're coming to the end here. The role of Taoism has these three different dimensions. You have the longevity practices that give you health and a vibrant life and success in the world. The philosophy allows you to think in terms of flow, in terms of allowing things to happen, in terms of naturalness, in terms of not being pushy. It gives you the sense of, again, another way of harmony. It gives you like a mental attitude, where the longevity gives you the physical and sort of basic success kind of material kind of basis for your harmony. The philosophical dimension gives you the mental, spiritual kind of harmony, where you see the world in these Taoist terms and ways of flowing. And then you engage in the ritual and in the organized religion aspect of things to be part of a community and to help the society and to be part of the world in this way. Now we do have Taoist studies. Traditionally, Taoist studies developed first in France and in Japan. And in comparison to other religion, Taoist studies is by far the youngest. And the reason is that the major collection of Taoist materials known as the Taoist canon, which consists of about 1,500 texts and was printed in the 15th century, was lost for many years. And they rediscovered it in a monastery in Sichuan near the Black Sheep Temple in Chengdu in the early 1920s. And then they had it reprinted, and then it was in China, it was very difficult at the time because all the 20s and 30s and 40s were periods of major unrest, both civil war and then war with the Japanese. So it was a very messy kind of time. So they didn't do a lot about this. Taoist kind of studies, but the Taoist canon made it into Japan and into Paris, into France. And so that's where scholars started to study this. So Japan and France were the #1 centers of Taoist studies until the 1980s and 90s. And then we start to have some in the US, and we have a number of European countries, England, Germany, Italy, had Taoist places where people would, professors of Taoist studies. The early teachers in the West were in California and in Hawaii, but now we do have many different places and many younger scholars. And I'm quite happy to say that nowadays, scholars of other religions and scholars of other societies and of history have to take Taoism into consideration. You can't ignore it anymore. Until 20, 30 years ago, if people studied, say, women, the role of women in a religion, or they studied, the role of charity, or they studied ethics in the different cultures, they would study this and that and something else, and Buddhism and Islam and all these different religions, and Taoism would never even be on the horizon. And that is not possible anymore. So now there is enough translations and there's enough studies, and people have started to really, Taoism is part of the more general discourse in academia. We still have a number of issues. We still need more translations of Taoist texts into good English. There are some texts that have been translated, but the quality is not all that great. There needs to be cooperation with practitioners, so people who practice Qigong and who practice acupuncture and some martial arts need to be taken into account. And it's really changed now, but there was quite a time when scholars would not talk to practitioners and practitioners would be scared of scholars. And I've been running an international conference on Taoist studies since 2003. And we're going to have another one. We had one on Zoom last year, and we're going to have another one next year in Nashville. And it's usually in the first week of June, about 4 days. Major international conference, 200 people around. And there's always practitioners and scholars. And it's one of the functions of this conference to have scholars and practitioners talk to each other. And it's the Journal of Taoist Studies that I edit has a whole section where practitioners have a voice. And that's, when I started this journal in 2008, and I said, I want an academic part, and then I want something called Forum on Contemporary Practice, where practitioners can talk. My colleagues were like, oh my God, you can't do this. This is impossible. You should not have these. I said, yes, I can, and yes, I will. And it's been very successful, and the practitioners really have appreciated how the scholars can give them insight and depth in terms of the history and the cosmology and the philosophy of the practices they do. And the scholars are learning from the practitioners to see how any of the things that they study in theory, how they pan out in practice. Cooperation with Taoist scholars and practitioners in China was something that was very on the rise, and more Chinese were coming here and were also speaking English. And so we had some very good exchanges going on. But then was the pandemic, and China is still completely closed. Nobody goes in or out. And also the political situation in China is that they've been on this track towards isolation, and there's been a very a tendency towards demonizing foreigners and to get away from foreign things. So I cannot predict what the situation is. But we do need to understand the modern reality of Taoism and current developments, which also includes a number of what we call new religions that have Taoist elements, but have sort of created their whole own organization and philosophy and worldview. And we do have Taoist inspired new religions that sort of started in the 80s and 90s in Taiwan, in Vietnam, in Korea, in Japan, in all kinds of places. So that's a whole development that is not well understood and that needs to be looked at. So here's this is some time ago. So we do have the international conference. Next time is in Nashville in 23, and we do have the Journal of Taoist Studies that I edit. It always comes out in February, so we just published volume 15. And then we have the Three Pines Press publishing house, which publishes books. We're going to publish, it's coming out in another month, a book on Qigong imitating and based on the dog. So how you can do certain practices that imitate dogs and then enhance your senses and create a whole new level of energy. And then I also, since September, I've been doing a series of lectures on Zoom, which is once a week, once every 2 weeks for an hour. And it's a Zoom lecture like this, but it's also recorded. So people who cannot listen to the lecture at the time, it's Thursdays at noon Eastern time. But people who don't have time to actually listen to it, they get the recording after. And so that's a very successful enterprise. So that concludes my discussion of Taoism for you today. So we have some time for questions.
Yes, we have questions in the chat, and
oh, good.
quite
Let me
a
look
few.
at it.
Yeah, I'll let you take a peek there.
What about Taoism do you appreciate most? I like the whole idea of seeing life and world as energy. Like rather than seeing things as rigid entities, it's this flowing feeling of energy, and the way that the energy undulates and you can modify it and you can flow with it. That's the part, and it's very essential. I also like it that Taoism is a very cheerful religion. You don't have this emphasis on suffering like you have in Buddhism. You don't have this emphasis on sin. It's like the universe essentially is functioning in a good way, and we just need to keep our energy up to flow along with it. So we're supported by this, by Tao and by the deity. So it's a very, it's also very gentle. There's no such thing as a Taoist fundamentalist. I mean, how would you be fundamentalist about flow? I mean, it's like, I flow more than you. I mean, it doesn't really work. So they're very tolerant. So I like many things about this. It's a friendly, tolerant, gentle kind of religion. Yes, hair as a, can you say more about the hair as antenna for divine energies? Yes, that is like something. Hair is a major factor in many religions, and it does have that sense of divine connection and of hair as like containing the essence of the person. And so there's in some traditions, when the person has a major ailment or disease, they cut off quite a bit of their hair and then burn it as an offering. So it's like, here, gods, take my hair, that's my essence, but let me be alive. So hair has that quality, and there's quite a bit of literature on that, how that plays out in different cultures. And so in the Buddhist tradition, where they shave the head, it is like you're reducing yourself to a more basic level. So you're sort of getting away from all this engagement with all kinds of other levels. But in Taoism, you're keeping the hair as this connection. Let's see what else we have. Similarities, priests in Taoism and priests in major world religions such as Catholicism. There's priests and there's monks in the Taoist tradition. In Catholicism, priests and monks are celibate. In the Taoist tradition, it's more like a Anglican or Protestant. The priests are not celibate. They have families and they do services for the community. Whereas the monks and nuns obviously live in their institutions and are celibate. They're also vegetarian. There's not a huge lot of difference between Taoist and other Taoist priests and other religions. They offer a channel to the divine and they do service for the community, and the monastic practitioners do practice self-cultivation, but monasteries are also centers where people can go and can get support and get help. So it's not all that different. Who can I see? Gender equality, about the extended gestation theme. Gestating a saint until he is old. Yeah, Lao Tzu has that, like to the mother of such a sage. We do have stories like this in the Chinese tradition where the person is old when he is born. In the Taoist tradition, it means that he's getting younger constantly, and sort of has the very powerful vital energy that allows him to become younger. It's an ambivalent tribute to the mother. The mother in the Taoist tradition is a divine figure who essentially has eternal life. And so a pregnancy of a number of years doesn't really make a dent in it. And the mother is very much honored. She's also a deity. So it's not necessarily, we'd have to talk about more about this. Where is Taoism predominantly today? China, Taiwan, elsewhere. It's very active in China and in Taiwan. In China, the main school is called Complete Perfection, and they're the monastic school, but they also have celestial masters who are community and married priests, and they have a number of other kinds of schools and other priests. And Taiwan is dominantly, they're not monastic, they dominantly live in families and in the community. There's, like I said, some in there. Singapore has a very vibrant Taoist community and organization. Hong Kong is a major center. And then you have smaller organizations in other East Asian countries, Korea and Vietnam and Macau. And then you have a few temples, like I said, and some numbers are increasing in both the US and in Europe. Buddhism, Confucianism, much better known, yes. That has to do with the history. Like I said, that in the Taoist canon was not reprinted until 1923, and then you had another 30 years of war before the Chinese, and then you had the Cultural Revolution. So in China, Taoist studies didn't really take off until the 90s. I mean, the whole last century was very much a non-Taoist kind of time. And since the text only made it into France and Japan to start with, we do have a few studies there in the 30s and 40s, but even there they had wars going on. So it was very tricky. Buddhism, on the other hand, people started to translate in the mid-19th century. So we're looking at a 100-year gap there. It's just the texts were not made available until much later. And so you do have translations of Sanskrit and Pali Buddhist materials, even other Indian religion texts much earlier. And so once you have translations of text, then people who don't know Sanskrit can study these things and can have debates on them, and then it goes on from there. So it has to do with history. Yin yang, parallel, non-dual. No, yin yang is not non-dual. Yin yang is complementary. It's dual. They're two different forces. Yin is the cold, and yang is the warm, and yin is female, and yang is male. And yin is, earth, and yang is heaven. They're two. They're definitely two. It's not non-dual. They do not coincide. They're not one and the same, but they form one complex. It's a complementarity. Complementarity is not quite the same as non-duality. So it's an ongoing flow. It's an energy flow. It's like current that goes up and flows down. It's waves. Think of wave functions. Electricity that flows, traffic lights that go red and green and red and green and red and green. It's this ongoing pattern, and it's dynamic. That's the other part. There's nothing static about it. You're in a yin situation and it flows into yang. You're in a yang situation, it flows into yin. It gets, it's night and day, morning and evening, summer and winter. So it's this constant ongoing pattern, and your goal about yin and yang is to have harmony rather than favoring one over the other. People with disabled bodies fare less well in Taoist circles will have able bodies. Not really. I mean, the Chinese in general do not have a lot of patience for people with disability. That's a Chinese thing. Taoists do have a lot of health practices that are really, really, really helpful. And quite a few people I personally know have had some major health issues and were like paralyzed from an accident, or half of their body didn't move because of a stroke. And then lo and behold, they practice the longevity Qigong energy practices and they get vibrant and healthy. And so within limitation, within those parameters where people had accidents or strokes, they recovered with the help of these practices, and then they became practitioners themselves and teach others. Other kinds of disabilities, Taoists are very tolerant by nature, and they are very supportive. And I would not think you'd have good resources to either improve or live the best life you can with a given disability. Not more popular, have gained more followers. Well, it's the same story. Again, it has to do with history. There's not enough publicity out there for long enough, and so Daoism is growing. Like I said, 20 years ago, scholars from other disciplines could safely ignore it. They can't do that anymore. In academic departments, you used to have a Taoist person in the Chinese literature or Chinese studies section. Now you have them in history and politics and sociology and on philosophy and all these different departments. You have Taoist people who can represent Taoism. So it's growing, but it has that lag, and it is growing in popularity. And the other part, people have often asked the question, why is it yoga is so popular and Qigong is not? Part of it is that Qigong, these energy practices or Tai Chi kinds of things, they're very subtle, and you do things that are very small movements, and a lot of it is like you're internally visualizing your energy to flow in a certain way, or have a certain color, or focus, or concentrate in certain areas of your body, and it's just not as interesting, as like having these more yoga kind of poses. So the tendency is for young people to be more attracted to the yoga type things, that where you can do headstands and upside down things. twist yourself in all kinds of different ways, as opposed to the more gentle Qigong moves where you're just sort of lifting a hand or moving very gently, which is more attractive to older people. No, I didn't really talk about the Boxer. Did the lecture discuss the Boxer Rebellion? The answer is no. Boxer Rebellion is a movement of, it has to do with Tai Chi people, but they were against the foreign presence in China around the year 1900, and they were Tai Chi martial arts organizations that were not specifically Taoist. So Taoists do health practices, and they've adopted some Tai Chi forms into Taoism, but Tai Chi itself and martial arts is a different tradition, and so it really had no place in this. Flow without government interference if interrupted. Yeah, how would Taoists handle this? Well, there's a lot of literature on how ideally Taoists serve as advisors to rulers, to tell them to abstain from aggressive behavior, such as the Ukraine situation. But then when the situation happens, again, you do the best you can, which is one reason why some Taoists also practice martial arts and know how to defend themselves. You do the best you can within the parameters of your own particular life, but they don't have easy solutions for difficult situations like that. Embryo respiration, embryonic breathing is a very subtle way of breathing. It's a high level of energy work where you allow the energy to flow through the body in increasingly subtle ways. You refine it, and you get to the point where your breath is extremely slow, very shallow, and your body starts to breathe through the pores. So it's like the embryo in the womb is nurtured by the body of the mother. So in embryonic breathing, the practitioner starts to be nurtured by the air and the energy of nature around him or her. And it's more like they call it pore breathing, and it's something you visualize, and then eventually the pores opening and closing and absorbing energy from the air around you. And eventually it becomes something that you get very good at, and then your breathing becomes extremely slow and gentle. Yin and yang are opposite and related. I think I already talked about that. So do we have other questions?
I will ask a question while we're waiting to see if anyone else does. Do you have a favorite version of the Daodejing, or a favorite translation?
Yes. I have a couple of translations that I really like. For more historical accuracy, I really like Wing Tzu Chan, that's C-H-A-N, and he's a scholar, a Chinese scholar who worked at Princeton University for many years, and he has a book called A Source Book in Chinese Philosophy, and in there he has a complete translation of the Daodejing, and I think it's also published separately, but he is if you want like a sense of the text in terms of historical, literary accuracy of what it says, that's a very good resource. And then in terms of spiritual interpretation and spiritual quality, I really like Witter Bynner, or Bynner. He's a poet, and his translation came out in 1944. Based on the two translations by other Whaley and Lin Yutang, and he was cooperating with a Chinese scholar who he had met at Berkeley. And it's a very poetic and he was a poet himself who didn't know Chinese, but it's very poetic, it's very beautiful, and it catches the spirit like probably none other. And it's one of the few translations that's written by an actual poet in English. So it's a Bynner, it's Bynner, Witter Bynner. And it's called The Way of Life According to Lao Tzu. Yeah.
Thank you. There is one more question in the chat here, a couple of them actually, and then we probably should cut this off for the evening. How about the afterlife? Do Taoists believe in reincarnation, having a soul, heaven and hell, etc.?
Okay. The answer is yes. Taoists believe in having, and they have different souls, like the Chinese. There's, according to the Chinese, the human being is like a yin-yang combination. And so there's a heavenly soul and an earth soul, and they come together in the course of gestation. And then at death, they separate. And so the earth soul stays with the corpse and is buried, and there's like, funerals are very important. The placement of tombs is very important, so that corpse soul or earth soul is happy, and eventually over usually a few generations, like maybe 100 years, it gradually disintegrates and returns back to the earth. And then the heavenly soul is worshipped in an ancestral tablet in the house. There's an ancestral altar, and there's usually a picture of the person, and then the ancestors are given rice and wine, like sake, rice wine, and things on a regular basis. And it's the steam, it's warm. So this, like I said, the gods eat incense, and so the ancestral spirits absorb the smoke, the fumes, the vapors of this food. And it's worshipped on, and then there's on the death anniversary and other anniversaries, there's some celebrations and the families come together, they have memorial activities. And then over a number of generations, as the memory of the living person gradually disintegrates and gets less and less. I mean, you may remember your grandparents, you have very much less memory of your great-grandparents, and once you get 4 generations back, you have hardly any memory because you never met these people. So those ancestors, as the memory of the living is reduced, is less, the spirit soul or the merges back into the heavenly spheres. So the idea is, again, it's a process, it's a flow thing. There's also integrated from Buddhism the belief in reincarnation, and it's the spirit part of the soul, the heavenly part of the soul that can undergo like punishments in various kinds of hells, and that can be reincarnated. And there's no real theoretical clarity of like, okay, the person has been dead for 2 years. Is he still around and is gradually disintegrating and moving into the heavens? Or has he reincarnated and is gone? So the Chinese don't really make a big distinction there. And so they're covering all the bases. So there's all kinds of rituals for a successful reincarnation and at certain times after the death. And then there's also rituals for, a gradual positive transitions into the heavens. So it's not like there's no either or on this, like we would require to know, okay, where now is the soul? Is it here? Is it there? Is it reincarnated or is it not? So they just assume that it does whatever it does, and they're, as far as they're concerned, they're supporting any development there. Okay, let's see what else. There was one other thing here. Oh, Qigong, starting with the T's together, it puzzles me why start there. You don't necessarily have the T's together, but you want the tongue needs to be at the roof of the mouth. So your mouth should be closed, you're breathing through the nose. and your teeth are lightly touching, and the tongue is at the upper palate, so it lightly touches the upper palate. And that has to do with the meridians, the energy lines that go through the body. And we talked earlier about the paired meridians that connect to the organs, but there's also single meridians that go up and down the back and front of the torso, and they connect. They have end points. One is like in the mouth, and the other one is sort of above the upper lip. And if you're putting your tongue there, then you're connecting those energy lines, and you want your energy lines to be smoothly connected as you're doing your chi exercises. So that is why this is important.
I'm going to take advantage of my position as the host and ask the last question, if I may. When you talk about Taoist yoga, was that some merging together of the two, or are they? I'm noticing a lot of similarities in practices and in philosophy, and so I'm just wondering how those two things have come together historically.
You do have developments of Taoist healing exercise practices that go from where the first documentation is 200 BC, and then Buddhism enters and brings in Indian kinds of yogic practices around 300, 400 AD. And so once you get to about 500 AD, you start to see these combined practices, where you have sequences, where you have more emphasis on deep breathing. So there is a continuous interchange, and then more Buddhists come in, and then there's Tibetan and Tantric kind of practitioners, and they have their own kinds of physical techniques, and they also get integrated, and then the Taoist techniques get moved into some of the Chinese Buddhist type yoga practices. So there's an exchange of practices that starts under the auspices of the integration of Buddhism around the 4th, 5th centuries. And that still continues. So yoga is very popular in China today, and some of the Qigong modes that we do have integrated some yogic practices, and there is increasing also like Qi yoga, so where people use like energy movements in yoga practices. So they're starting to merge a little more. You don't have inversions in Qigong. They don't usually, like yoga is pretty heavy on, not heavy, but yoga has a fair amount of where your head is below your heart, bending forward. They're forward bends, but they're not like headstands, handstands, other things where you're inverting your body is very rare in Qigong, if not exactly non-existent. And you also don't have a lot of standing, still standing, holding, balancing postures. So like, you know, the tree pose in yoga where you're on one leg and you're holding that. In Daoism, you wouldn't do that. Or in Qigong, you would be, balance practice comes into it, but it's very slow movement. And that has to do with the whole notion of yin and yang. So Qigong is a lot more dynamic. There is dynamic in yoga, but there's also a strong emphasis on stability, on holding. Whereas in the Qigong tradition, there's much less of that. So there are some differences there, but historically, you start to see a connection once you, once by the 5th century.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you speaking to us today. This has been so wonderful, and I think we've all learned so much, and thank you again.
Yeah. So let me type this website if you want to check out more to the and there's a section there on Tao Explore, which is my lecture series. That's twice a month. And then there's also the Journal of Tao Studies, which just came out. So those are some of the good resource to look at if you want to learn more. And we do have all kinds of books and things in 3 Pines Press. And so.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.